Welcome to the Kentucky Auto Accident Podcast. Louisville attorney Jim Desmond has been handling injury cases related to traffic accidents for over 20 years. Jim will provide valuable information to help you and your family. He wants you to understand the important issues you need to know when it comes to handling car accidents and motorcycle wrecks in Kentucky. There's a lot riding on this, so let's get started. Friends, welcome to episode 6 of the Kentucky Auto Accident Podcast featuring Jim Desmond of the Desmond Law Office right here in Louisville, Kentucky. My name is Jim Ray. I'm a non-attorney spokesperson, and I'm sitting here just kind of guiding the conversation. Jim Desmond is the licensed attorney in both Kentucky and Indiana and has a lot to say on this subject. He's dealt with injury clients for over 20 years, and that's part of the reason that we kind of put this podcast together was to provide a lot of information to people because typically you just don't know attorneys. I mean, you see some guys on TV, you see some guys on various advertisements, but maybe you don't know them. So hopefully this is a way that you can kind of get to know Jim a little bit better, and we'd appreciate you taking the time to listen. This episode will be about 30 minutes, and we're going to jump into really a carryover from episode 5. So about 2 weeks ago, episode 5 was really the beginning of unpacking the process of what you do after a car wreck, with some of the things that you really need to understand. And Jim talked a little bit about some of the different coverages and some of the different aspects. And today is going to be just a continuation of that conversation. So Jim, welcome aboard. I appreciate you showing up, and we'll jump right in here when you're ready.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it very much. Let's take it from the point that we were talking about a little bit last week, that let's assume you've been in a car wreck, and hopefully you have a police report, okay, at this point. So we've got somebody else who hit us, or you more correctly, and we're trying to figure out who they're insured with, and that way we're going to basically get our property damage claim going. Well, first step is when you look at that police report, they should have an insurance company's name listed. Now, this is the part that I'm going to tell you is going to be a little frustrating because you may not encounter it. You may deal with you might see some big company listed like a Progressive, State Farm or something, but many times I'll see some other company listed that maybe I've never seen before because I do enough claims that comes up. If that's the case, my first step or my first suggestion to you as well is you Google that name, okay? Or in Kentucky and Indiana too, you can go to the Department of Insurance and try to see if you can pull that company up. That way, their contact information. What you want is their claims phone number. And now, when you report a claim, understand something. It's about a 30-minute process. You're going to want that police report in front of you, and you're going to be talking to somebody on the other end about basically how the accident happened. So you do want to be careful about what you said, okay? But I want to take a quick step back from that. Let's say you finally track down the right insurance company, you get the claims reporting hotline on the line, and now you're trying to find insurance on this guy. And the problem you have to understand is you may have the information. First of all, your information may be incorrect on who the car is allegedly insured with. Is the company you're seeing listed, is it actually insuring the driver or the car? It could do one or both. And that's one reason I want you to understand when you're dealing with that claims first on the phone, if they strike out to begin with, then ask them to run a search in many different ways. They can sometimes run it by address. They can sometimes run it by the VIN number of the vehicle. Look at the police report. If the police officer, generally speaking, a driver, right behind the driver's name is the code 01 in Louisville, okay? Or Kentucky in general, more correctly, that's a driver, okay? 08 means the owner of the vehicle. So if you've got the insurance company on the phone, look and see, can we have more than one name we can potentially run to try to find out who this person, we want to find a policy that this person is insured under is what we're trying to find because this company's got to be open the claim. Now, I don't normally like to take the side of insurance companies, but I do want to do it this time. When you call them, you need to understand something. They can't just jump and say, okay, you're right, our guy's at fault, unless this guy was really reputable and called in immediately and said, yes, I rear-ended somebody and I caused it. And in which case you might even hear from them before you even get the police report. But you report the claim, don't minimize your injuries, okay? Tell them where the car is located. They should be allowed to come see the car, or you should be willing to run it by one of their body shops to look at it. I will tell you to get a fax number, okay, and a claim number. Anything you ever send to them, you've got to make sure you have that claim number on there. If you don't have it, it goes in the dead letter file, so to speak, okay?
And it's kind of important to differentiate. Sometimes you're going to have two different claim numbers. We're talking about property damage. In episode 5,
Nope, wrong, Jim. Sorry. Cutting him off.
No,
okay.
jump in.
Usually you will have one claim number per accident per insurance company. So when you're thinking two different claim numbers, you're thinking your own insurance company, that's the no-fault carrier. That's going to be a different claim number.
So that's that PIP coverage we talked about in
Right.
episode 5 and some of the previous episodes. So that's what I meant. There's another claim number out there. What this carrier is worried about is what we're talking about now.
He's the liability carrier,
Bingo.
and we want their claim number. Now, the part that you will want to know, though, again, is usually there's two different adjusters within that company, one who's assigned to the property damage claim and one who's assigned to the bodily injury claim. So again, and I will tell you this, whenever anybody calls you or you talk to somebody on the phone from an insurance company, I always say, first of all, I ask that I might have the claim number there so I can give it to them, but also if I'm in doubt, I will say who's their insured, because understand something. Jim actually kind of went into a good topic here I forgot about. Let's say you're insured with Progressive, and I had this actually happen. You're insured with Progressive, and the guy that hits you in the rear end is insured with Progressive, okay? Now you got Progressive calling you. Well, it's a very different, situation. Is this your insurance company trying to protect you and trying to see what they can do to get your medical bills paid? Or is this somebody trying to say, no, the other person is not at fault? And the only way you know that, again, is to know, first of all, the proper claim number, but then secondly, say who's your insured. And I'll just tell you, it was another company. I don't want to down Progressive on this one. But I had that situation happen. And the adjuster, and I think maybe we talked about in the first couple episodes about this, the adjuster said to me, well, your client has a duty to give a recorded statement under this accident. And I said, no, they don't. This is not, back to what we said before, this is not first-party coverage. This was third-party coverage. This was a liability claim, okay, governed by the law, not governed by the contract, which the contract of insurance is first-party coverage. And so again, we didn't have to do it, and we still got the claim. We got them to accept fault and everything else, but they thought they were going to be able to pull this on us. It's like, no, it's a totally different situation. But
they're not your friends. They're typically not your friends.
Well, and that's a good point. Okay, I'm not going to badmouth an insurance company and say they're bad people. They're not. I deal with a lot of insurance adjusters all the time, and they're good people. But the part that people need to understand is, if you're an insurance adjuster, you've got probably 400 files, okay? And those files can be audited 2 or 3 years from now, okay? So you've got to have all your T's crossed and your I's dotted. So what do I tell clients is that they've got to learn to try to help that insurance adjuster where they can. So back to when you report an accident, if, for example, I just met somebody the other day. I didn't go to they couldn't get in my office, so I went to them. And as I'm walking out on their driveway, I took photographs of the damage to the vehicle. So when I've reported that claim, I've sent up the police report, the photos I took, and then a little bit about my client's treatment. Because again, I'm going to lay it all out there for them, make it nice and easy on them, okay? It's that you have to understand that, again, they can't do things without making it clear why they're doing it. Let's go back to the car for a second, because I do want to go there. This is a little bit of a tip more because we've already covered it. But, again, back to they're going to total your car out. And you say, this is a Nissan sports car worth $10,000, you're saying. And the insurance company says, no, it's worth, $7,500 at best. They can't just say, well, you know what, he made a persuasive argument and we're going to pay him $10,000. You need to show them documentation. So like I tell people on that, pull up documentation about it. Your receipts. What did you do to improve on the value? Your repair costs. They say that doesn't increase the value, but I still want to show them it's a good working order. What are dealerships asking for that car around the state? Are they asking higher figures? And I have to supply that all to that insurance company, and that goes back to the original point. You said, well, they're not our friends. They've got a job to do. And the more reasonable we are, the easier chance we have of getting that claim and going on. Now, am I telling you to bend over backwards and do everything you can for them and do their job? No. But I want you to understand that there's a real big concept under all areas of the law, which is the reasonable person wins. So if you're being reasonable and saying, here, I'm going to go ahead and give you as much information as I can, it does help. There's no question about it, especially when you're reporting the claim. Because, again, if you come off, excuse my French, but if you come off as a jackass, you're one of 400 files, and this adjuster's got to go on to somebody else because his phone's being burnt up. I hope that makes some sense. It actually is a very good point, and it's one thing I will tell people I think one of the ways, I'm going to sound a little conceited here maybe, but one of the ways I think I tend to excel a little bit is I understand that I'm going to deal with these insurance adjusters again and again over the years, and I have. And I'm not necessarily going to bend over for them, but if I expect them to treat me with respect and for me to treat them with respect. And if we do that, I find that many times you can get a case settled rather than have a personality difference kind of entered into the picture. So
that makes sense. I mean, don't pick a fight until it's time to pick a fight. That's
right.
what you're saying.
And do what you can.
Roadhouse rules. Patrick Swayze.
Because think about it. Because what's your goal? Your goal is your car. Most of us have one primary vehicle we're relying on, and your goal is to get that thing fixed with the least headaches and get it back on the road. Because we're so dependent upon our vehicles, and so the more we can do that to kind of facilitate it, make it go faster, the better. Because the other thing, this kind of leads to one other point I want to make. And this is a part that's so frustrating for my clients, and I do get it, and I wish there's more we could do. An insurance company has a reasonable amount of time to investigate a claim. So you call, let's use State Farm again, for example. You call State Farm, and they have not heard from their person. The guy rear-ended you, but they haven't heard from him.
So the wreck happened on Monday. You're calling on Tuesday.
Right. You got a police report and everything, okay? And and hopefully you have a police report by then, because that would be one of the situations where that would probably be highly influential, okay? Right. So they take all the facts from you and everything else, but they can't say to you, yes, go get your car fixed, because they don't know what really happened. They don't know what their driver is saying or why they're, matter of fact, who's driving their car. I had one recently that it was the mother's vehicle and the daughter was driving, but the daughter was not listed as a member of that household. So again, you had to be able to get hold of that person and explain what was going on and why were they driving it. Remind me about permissive use in 3 seconds. I really want to come back to that tip. And I lost my other train of thought now because of that.
Well, hey, let's talk about permissive use. It's about 3 seconds.
If you have, this is a tip I do want to give you, and I've blogged about this before. The short story, permissive use is a doctrine that, look, if I give you my car keys to run down the road to do whatever, okay, you have my permission to drive my vehicle, so my insurance coverage applies to you. Your insurance coverage is secondary. It's over and above my insurance coverage only, and it comes on to play only if it's needed, okay? If, on the other hand, you've been driving my car every day for the last 10 months, okay, my insurance company says, we had no idea who this other guy was, and we're not going to provide coverage for that. We have a defense to the contract.
Right. They weren't on the original policy. You didn't list them as an additional insured. Right. Okay, you get into that.
That's a little side tip that took me off the original train of thought that I wanted to get back to, but I don't remember what it was. So it'll come to me later on, right?
So what you were getting at was that they had the insurance company has a reasonable time to get out there and investigate, and they need to get a hold of their person, and they
yes. Oh, thank you on that. Okay,
I do this for a living.
So you're frustrated because they've got a reasonable amount of time to investigate it, and what's reasonable is very hard to determine. I've got one case where, it's gone on more than 30 days and they haven't accepted fault, but that's because the other people are represented by an attorney too, and we're all pointing the finger at each other as driver. And so we're having a real issue there. The problem you have as an attorney is this. If I really have an insurance company that's not going to accept fault, what are my options? And we're going to get through that sometime in a later podcast.
Yeah.
But it's to file a lawsuit. Well, if I file a lawsuit, not only do the attorney fees jump up, not only does it cost me $300 some odd to file it, and that comes out of your personal injury claim, but also a defendant, the guy I'm suing, has a right to basically hire an attorney and file an answer. He's got 20 days from the time he receives all the paperwork I sent out by the sheriff. He's got 20 days from that time to file a written answer, okay? And then the lawsuit starts.
So the time in this process just expands.
It just expands.
Big time.
So it's not like there's a cure-all. So again, to me, what's one of the cure-alls is going back and trying to do what you can, where I have had, I was thinking when we talked about videotape in the last session, I had one that my client, none of us brought up videotape to begin with. My client and I finally discussed it, and we had a long shot video camera, we decided, that was like 200 yards down the road that an investigator found for me, okay? And we had to go through a lot of hoops to get it. Well, we got it. But the ironic part was it didn't show, it was very far in the accident, so it didn't show really what we wanted, but it did show that light of that other driver changing. And that's all we needed, and boom, we turned it around.
There was.
Bringing back what we talked about 3 minutes ago, again, is sometimes the best way is to, jump through the hoop a little bit, get a little more information, because rather than making the situation where it takes longer, get them what they can to kind of hopefully agree with you and move on to the next case.
Well, and this comes back to something I talked to you about right before we did this episode, is that, yeah, all of this, though, takes time and it's complicated. And I would think it would be a lot easier for me, especially if I've been in an accident and I'm worried about, getting to the doctor. I'm worried about, getting back to my job. I'm worried about bill stacking up, things like that. Why wouldn't I just kind of shove this all over to my attorney and say, Jim Desmond, can you handle this for me? I mean, that's kind of what you do, right?
Right. And I agree with that. And I mean, but a lot of people don't want to. And there's two aspects to that. The first is, even if they want to do that, I like for people to understand the process, because they'll get frustrated with me or something and say, hey, I haven't heard from you around this. And it's like, I'll try to tell them what's going on, but they have to understand the process, that there's a lot of things that we bang the drums over and over, but we don't know if anyone's hearing the sound, so to speak, when it comes to the insurance company. We have to do things sometimes several times to get a response. The second aspect is, you're right. This is the part I never understand. A friend of mine is trying to get this other gentleman to call me. He was in a pretty serious accident, and he hasn't done so yet. And I said, look, just call me and let's talk about it for 15 minutes, because let's get you on the right track. But I never understand how people think we're going to wait 6 months, we're going to hire an attorney then. It's still going to charge. We're still going to charge you the same 1/3 fee. So all that's happening is basically we're going to have to go back and hopefully correct whatever's gone wrong, rather than doing it right from day one. So that is another aspect of it, that yes, I would prefer somebody to either get a hold of me to begin with, because they're basically getting a better bang for their buck. But then two, we know we're doing it right from minute one. So, I mean, I do like people to know what I'm talking about, and I will tell you this stuff over and over and then bore you to death with it. But that's because, again, I think it's important you understand the process, because, again, this is the crazy part about law in general. We get behind the wheel of a vehicle and we don't know, but we don't know, I'm going to be crude here again, our ass from our elbow. Okay, because when it comes to car insurance law or personal injury or anything else, we may know how to get the car down the road. And again, even though they're attorneys, I mean, I'm not downing them, but it's again, I have no idea where the bankruptcy court is in Louisville. Okay, you got to know what you're doing in what area. And until I really got into car accidents, did I understand a lot of the nuances, that can kind of hit you. As I say that, I think about the motorcycles. And again, I'm going off tangent, and poor Jim's giving me a look like, what am I doing? But back to motorcycles, and we've talked about this before, that they're not entitled to no-fault coverage, okay? Right. And automatically, you got to buy this, and it's very expensive. So again, it's one of those things that, how do people know that? Well, the average attorney doesn't know that, but if you do car wrecks or personal injury, yes, you do know that.
You see it on a weekly basis.
Right, right. So it's, and I guess if nothing else, if you and I, through these podcasts, are giving people the ability to ask questions of either other attorneys or insurance agents, preferably before the accident ever happens, fantastic. We've succeeded. So,
and friends, if you're out there listening, let me just give you a really good piece of advice here. If you're one of those people who really kind of wants to try it on your own, at least in the initial stage, visit attorneydesmond.com. Jim, you and I have worked on that website for probably 12 years. There is a tremendous amount of content there. There's a tremendous amount of information there that, if you want to go back and look at some other stuff, there's great, blog posts on there. There's some videos on there. You've done a great job over a lot of years compiling all this information, and it's out there.
It is. It is. And there's a lot. And all right, I'm going to sound conceited here. There's enough information that it's kind of funny sometimes, because when I hit Google to try to find a legal question, sometimes I'll see one of our own posts come up and I'm like, that's not exactly what I'm looking for this time, but it is flattering that it does happen. So yeah. Or the better yet, just, like I said, pick up the phone. It doesn't take, my kids they shake their head at me, but I live and breathe this car accident stuff. I've done it over 25 years and it's one of those that it takes 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and we make sure we give you a little bit of nuances. And if you're an easy, perfect case, then fantastic. But if you're not, then, let's make sure we kind of avoid a pitfall or two right off the bat. So
that makes sense. Hey, Jim, let's jump back into kind of a continuation from episode 5. In episode 5, we did kind of run through a scenario in which the other person says, yeah, I was at fault, and the claim kind of got started, and it just kind of rolls through the system. But now let's go from the other side. What happens if the person that was in the accident with you says, hey, hold on, I'm not admitting fault. It's not my fault. In fact, I'm going to blame you. The whole thing changes at that point.
The whole thing changes. It comes to a standstill for the most part, And that's the problem you need to understand is that, insurance companies settle, and this is an oversimplification. I know there's a thing called the bad faith law out there, but their insurance companies settle claims because it's to their advantage, okay? Because they don't want a million cases in litigation. But, if they've got a reasonable basis to dispute fault, then they can say, go to blazes, okay? Prove your case in front of a jury. And that's really what that's what litigation is about when all these people talk about filing lawsuits. You're trying to get in front of a jury and prove, the fault and your pain and suffering and everything. And that's a hard thing to do these days, especially with this conservative environment. But let's go back instead and talk about the property damage. It's a little bit easier to do that. Remember, Kentucky's pure comparative fault. So what you have a lot of time, well, I have a case right now. Other person pulled out, and I know we've talked about this one before, but we're in litigation over it because they want to put 15% fault against my client for allegedly not seeing their person in time, even though the other person pulled out from a side street. So my client had the right of way, okay? That's the kind of malarkey sometimes you can deal with. Now, the problem I have is if I accept that 85-15 split, they also have a claim against my client's insurance company for that 15%. And that means that person that was injured, or if they were injured on the other side, they have a claim for their 15% of their pain and suffering, 15% of their car, their loss of use claim, everything else down the road.
15% doesn't sound like much until you really start adding everything up.
Right.
And that could be a significant number, especially if the majority of the reason you guys are in court to begin with is the other person. Right. You were just driving down the road.
Well, that's the worst part is how did the accident happen? Yeah. Because again, one of the principles that, I borrowed this from a friend of mine, okay, that it's not what we think happened, it's what can we prove. And that's why, again, back to what we talked about in the beginning of the last episode, is, when you're at the scene of the accident, if you can take pictures, fantastic, it can help. If you can look for video cameras, it's great. I'm playing with it. I don't have it operational yet, but there's actually these webcam, the dashes now. I'm sorry, I have a dash cam now. Yeah. Cost me $150. Mounts on top of my radar detector, to be honest. Okay, but it will take video of for like a 24-hour period of everything I do while I'm driving.
Right.
And so again, if you have anything like that, sometimes it can be worth it in the long run because again, you don't want to be in a lawsuit over something that's not your fault. That's the worst part about the law is get back to something I've always said. The law is not fair. It endeavors to be fair, but it does not succeed. So if you have an insurance company saying you're at fault for a wreck, first step is I'd like to talk to you. Second step, I would like to see what the police report says. If the police report lists you as the number one driver, then he was trying to put you at fault, generally speaking. The big issue is probably in determining fault. One of the things we all look for as personal injury attorneys, and I think this is crucial, is who has the right of way. I have preached about that over and over. Jim brought up my website. I blogged on it. That's how I drive a lot of times is who has the right of way. So I'm well aware that, if I'm turning left in front of somebody, then I'll floor it if I need to get out of their way because I know I don't have the right of way. If I'm pulling out of my subdivision, okay, I don't have the right of way. If somebody is waving me out of traffic, guess what? It doesn't matter unless I have the right of way.
So I'm pulling out of a gas station into traffic, even though that person has slowed down and said, flash their lights or waved at you, said, yeah, go ahead. You still do not have the right of way. And therefore, if something does happen, the arrows are going to point to you.
Yeah, that person may be a little different, but yes. So let's assume usually what happens on that situation is the person waving you on is on the inside lane, and you swerve out to the outside lane, and boom, you get nailed.
Yep.
It's a situation where again, so like when I do get a phone call, that's kind of worth mentioning, and I think most personal injury attorneys are this way. You just mentioned somebody pulling out. If I hear pulling out, turning left, or rear-ending, I'm like, oops.
Yeah.
And it forms a bias right off the bat. Now, is it always the case that those people are at fault? No. Okay.
But that's the presumption, at least at the outset.
Right. And so that's, again, back to, well, how do you want to counter that presumption? Well, hopefully you got a police report showing otherwise. Hopefully you got photos at the scene showing otherwise. Hopefully you've got maybe a video showing otherwise. There's a whole lot of other things that kind of go into play with it.
And again, these situations are complicated. And I know there's a lot of people that want to try to handle it on their own. Oh, I don't want to sue somebody. Oh, I don't want to, get into some big court case. I just want to settle it out and we'll be fine. And that in a perfect world, that should work out. But it doesn't always go that way. In fact, you and I were talking a while back, and you said about 90% of your clients didn't actually want to, file a lawsuit to begin with.
Right. Well,
until they were treated wrong.
And let's distinguish. We're not even talking. You say it's complicated. We haven't. It's funny. We have. I created a several-page outline in this thing, and we're still not even through all of it. And because it is complicated, and we're not even getting to the point of litigation. You talked about lawsuit. Yeah. This is all a pre-litigation settlement discussions.
We're in the claims.
Thank
status.
You. Yes, exactly. So it's one of those that we haven't even gotten that far yet with it. You mentioned something else in that I wanted to comment.
No, it's just, a lot of people don't want to file a lawsuit. And it wasn't until the insurance company on the other side said or treated them wrong that now, this may be my only recourse.
Well, and when I say, okay, you quoted me, which is true. I say 90% of the people came to me and said, I didn't want to come to you, but it's because of the way I was treated by the insurance company, okay? Yeah. And that's usually true. And a lot of times on that, and this is where I can't take their defense, is you get a lot of times, especially if you're not an attorney and you're calling an insurance company, you're usually getting the junior adjuster, and sometimes their people skills are not the best, and they offend you because they don't understand explaining the law to you and everything else. It's a situation that, again, I don't know. It's a very complicated situation, but again, I think the best thing you can ever do on all this is take a step back and talk to an injury attorney. And when I say an injury attorney, let me be clear on something. I'm going to tangent again here for a second. If you call a TV advertiser, I'm not talking about a damn case manager. I am not talking about an intake coordinator. I'm not talking about a paralegal. And I'm sorry if I offend people that are out there with that. But I'm talking about a licensed attorney that does personal injury law, okay? I have heard too many things over the years of people getting it wrong. And the other thing is I would not rely on an insurance adjuster. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
They're good. There's a lot of them good. I'm not saying that. But again, they don't always know where the law is. And so again, I'm like, what you're saying, Jim, if you think you hit a roadblock, especially if you think you hit a roadblock, you pick up the phone, talk to an injury attorney, because what you're realizing from day one is you're preparing your case from the minute that accident happened, okay? And you don't want to do it, and you don't want to, you say you don't want to file a lawsuit. That's fine. Most cases don't go through to a lawsuit, okay? But the ones that don't, generally speaking, you took the advantage of it and did it the smart way to begin with and said, what do I need to do to make sure things go the right way? Because you can't just say, okay, they're going to pay my claim because they're afraid of me. They're not afraid of anybody. Insurance companies are in multi-million-dollar businesses, okay? We're talking about, different personal injury attorneys. They've got a whole set of attorneys on defense side that they can hire too, okay? It's doing your homework and kind of understanding ahead of time what you need. And that's what I hope out of all these podcasts, people are picking up and saying, okay, this is what we might need to do to basically make sure we're where we need to be.
Right, to protect yourself, if nothing else.
Yes, because again, unfortunately, you walk outside and an insurance agent, again, I'm not trying to badmouth insurance agents, but most insurance agents want to get you out as cheap as possible so you don't go to the next guy who says, I can get you a cheaper policy, and yet that's fine. And for 95% of the accidents, that's fine. For the 5% that are really severe, you're going to be saying, oh, crap, I learned my lesson.
I wish I'd have spent a little bit more up front.
Yes.
Yeah. Jim, I appreciate that. Let's transition into a segment that, for our friends out there, this is something we try to do every episode. And this segment is called So This Happened This Week. And really what we use this for is to talk about a different topic. It's not necessarily related to what you just heard, but it also gives you some insights into other things that may be going on, things that Jim has heard or been dealing with over the last couple of weeks, just to kind of give you a different taste of injury law. But Jim, today we're going to kind of talk about an issue related to actually your daughter's automobile insurance policy.
Right. Well, I just wanted to share with people, it's kind of funny because I had to put my money where my mouth was, because my daughter's 19 years old, but now living in another state, but driving my vehicle. So no accidents, luckily, no tickets. But when I put her on my auto insurance policy, okay, my rate jumped up by about $2,500 a year because she's a young driver. So the short story is I took a little bit of time. Well, actually, before I even go there, let's go through something here. Let's go back and pull in some of the coverages we just talked about. The automobile policy, she's still under my policy. That's first-party coverage like we talked about before. That's the coverage I bought. So she's in South Carolina. If there was, God forbid, a car accident in South Carolina law would control the facts of the accident. But everything I buy and have put on that first-party coverage through my auto insurance, okay, follows her because she's still driving my vehicle and she's listed on my policy as a driver, okay? So the Kentucky no-fault, ironically, even though it's another state, and I'd have to go through and look at South Carolina law and make sure that there's not an exception, but 95% of the time, that's going to follow her that same way, and she's going to have that coverage. The uninsured and underinsured coverage, absolutely, no question about it. Okay, so what was my goal with keeping her on my policy is to make sure she's adequately protected. Okay, and yes, I do, like I've said before, I practice what I preach. So, for example, and I'll just come out and tell people this, and hopefully nobody sues me. But I've got $500,000 across the board of uninsured and underinsured coverage. Do I think I'll ever use that? No. Do I hope I'll never use it? Correct. But it's there if we ever need it. Well, what I looked at and said, okay, because I got one of these quotes from this insurance company saying because she drives a Volvo, they would do it cheaper. So I decided, okay, I'm going to go ahead and go online and play with it and see what they said. The short story is, again, on that, she would have been, I paid $2,500 a year for her. She would have been $3,300 or $3,400 a year, but for only $100,000 in coverage. So I would have been paying a higher amount for her to be on her own policy, okay, and yet she would have had $400,000 less of protection out there. So obviously, I'm just going to leave her on my policy. Now, to tell you how fun insurance can be, I've been with this company 20 some odd years, and I also got a notice from them today saying instead of doing our year-long premium we usually do, we're going to now do 6 months. And why they say that is that the market is changing so fast that allegedly it gives them the ability to either raise or lower rates after 6 months. And I guarantee you, I do not think I'll be dealing with a lower insurance premium in 6 months. Yeah. But it is, my point being to you, yes, I know it's expensive. Yes, I know it's not what you need or not what you want to have on your, to do and pay for, but yes, you do need it. It's as simple as that. And you got to be smart about it. If she had had a lot of accidents, this is a little side note that people can do. If she had had a bunch of accidents and that was what was driving up the claim, or her cost, more correctly, her insurance premium, then yes, maybe it would have been worth it to split her off to a separate insurance policy and go from there. But as it is right now, she's protected not only because she's under mine, she's protected under, she's a named driver under my policy. One more tidbit that I've said in the past, if she was not, well, it gets a little more complicated, but let's bring her age down so it's easier. If she was on her learner's permit, okay, and she was living in the other state still, okay, but not, well, I'm making it a little complicated. My point is I want to make to you, you can also have coverage as a resident relative of the same household. So okay. if she lived somewhere else but lived part of the year with me, that she could also have my policy could still apply, not necessarily the liability coverage.
So it's fairly common. I mean, there's a lot of divorced families out there.
That's where I was headed at, but I didn't. Yeah.
So okay, so let's say you're paying for the automobile insurance. However, she actually lives with her mom, and even if her mom lives in a different state, if she's covered under your policy, that may be an advantage for you.
Exactly, and that's okay. I blogged on that one time, a long time years ago, and that's we could do first 15 minutes of a podcast on that issue alone, and we probably will because it is kind of an interesting issue, but it's. Again, it's, I mean, we all understand car insurance is expensive. We don't want to have to spend the money, but guess what? When you have a severe accident, you want to have it. And a lot of the stuff, I mean, the one thing I will say here, I'll close out on, that I take pride on is the stuff we're telling you is not specific to Desmond Law Office, okay, or Jim Desmond. It's stuff that you can use to protect yourself before the accident ever happens. And, if you choose another attorney, so be it, but at least you're going to be protected. That's the biggest thing, because the biggest frustrating part for me is when somebody comes in and nice people, didn't cause an accident, injuries are severe, and another guy has little to no insurance. And it's just too frustrating.
Right. And at that point, it's unfortunate, but...
At that point, I'm stretching a dollar bill to try to make it look pretty, and it's and I can stretch it pretty well, but I can never make it look as good as a $10 bill.
Yeah. Makes sense. Friends, I really appreciate your time today. Jim, thanks for sitting in today. Thanks for showing up at the studio and recording episode 6 with me. And we'll be back in about 2 weeks with episode 7. And if you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to go back and there are other podcasts that are available to you on the website, on the Facebook page. You can Google it and pick up on it as well. Jim's website is attorneydesmond, DESMOND.com. You can find him on Facebook as well. You can connect that. Hopefully this information is helpful. Car wrecks are something we never want to think about, but when you're in one, you want somebody that knows the game, knows how to do it, and knows how to do it right. Jim, I appreciate your time, guy.
Thanks again, Jim.
Yep.
We'll see you next week.
Yep. Take care. Bye-bye. That's it for this episode of the Kentucky Auto Accident Podcast. Jim Desmond will be back in 2 weeks to provide information you need to know related to car accidents and motorcycle wrecks in Kentucky. Until then, check out attorneydesmond.com. You can also follow him on Facebook at Attorney James Desmond. Drive safely, and please remember to buckle up.